2414 is a podcast about finding hope and common ground through casual conversation. Like the friends on the road in the New Testament, in Luke chapter 24, verse 14, we want to walk away with more understanding that leads to more conversation as the journey continues. Thanks for walking with us.
There. So important. Hello. Welcome to 2414. My name's Dan. That's Shane. We are joined by a new friend of the show, Pastor David LaFore. Hello, David.
Hello.
And we have a special guest today, Dr. Greta Turnbull. Hi, Greta.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome. Oh my gosh, this is fun.
Super happy.
It's been fun to get to meet you and laugh, and we haven't cried yet together, but I expect that'll be coming soon.
I do cry a lot,
well,
so yeah.
This is a safe place. Today we're continuing our series on vocation, the different callings in our life, the spheres of people and relationships that we get to serve and love and work with and for. But before we get into the topic at hand, highs and lows, something that's celebratory, something's worth celebrating, a joy, a happy thing, maybe a sad thing or a burden, something that's made you laugh, something that made you feel frustrated.
Well, how about you give us an example?
All right, I will.
Kick us off.
But I was saying something, Shane.
Oh, sorry.
So okay. I coach, I volunteer coach this. Coach is a generous word for my contribution at our cross country club. I'm another adult to make sure kids don't get lost in the dark. But they call me coach, so that's what I go with. But a few weeks ago, I asked one of our athletes, I said, hey, what's something that made you smile today? Kind of just doing highs and lows while we're running. And ever since then, they've been asking me the same thing at practice.
So cool.
Like, hey, Coach Dan, what's something that made you smile today? And I was like, that's really, really cool. So cool. Highs and lows is good. And then the question of the day is, what's a job that you've had in the past that you are glad is in the past? It could even, if you don't have any employment, maybe it's a chore at home, but what's something that you had to do or you chose to do or you professionally did that you're okay not doing anymore, and maybe even a part of that job. So I'll kick it off, Shane. Lows and highs. Sweet. A low is I haven't slept well the last couple of nights, in part because I got a nap one day, which was so good. That should probably be one of my highs for the week. I had a nap. I don't often get naps. I have children, and they're the opposite of having naps. But I got a nap, and that was amazing. And then later in the evening, everybody else was going to bed, and I'm like, hey, it's a new day. Let's do this. So that kind of had a ripple. So I didn't sleep well. So then I was tired the next day. So then I overcompensated with coffee, which meant that I didn't sleep the next night. So my low, haven't slept well for a couple of nights. One high is I got a nap, which was awesome. Another high is, as much as I love coaching with our track club, the season is almost over, and I will get about 15 hours back into each week. So I'm anticipating having more disposable time. One job I used to have that I don't have anymore, that I don't regret, and I'm thankful it's behind me. I loved working at my Jewish deli all through high school, but there were parts of it that are kind of unconscionable. Just cleaning out. So I was a busboy and dishwasher the first 6 months or so until I turned 16, because you had to be 16 to handle the knives on the cook line. But I could wash them like in the soapy, sudsy water, just blindly,
reaching in,
so things change. But one of the chores also when I was a cook was to clean off those rubber floor mats. Maybe you've seen them. They're like a 3x3 grid. They've got quarter-sized holes that catch all the filth, and it's just slimy and gross. And at the end of the day, you had to drag them out and hose them off. And that was one of the worst things I've ever done in my life, and I had to do it several nights a week. So I don't miss cleaning up the cook line, although parts of that job were super fun and silly. All right. Yeah. Shane, what about you? Lows, highs? What's a job that you are happy is behind you?
Yeah. All right. So lows, just keep it simple. I don't think things are going well. Lows, it's just that still catching up a little bit from after the show, after a few special services Sundays. So still catching up a little, but I'm getting closer to where I want to be. So
what was your character's name in the show?
In the show, I was Marsalis Washburn.
Marsalis Washburn.
Yeah.
And you sang about Poo poo? What was it? What was the name of the song?
Shapoopy.
Shapoopy. Sorry.
Yeah. And
All
like
my kids heard was poop.
I should have gone to the show.
Well, me too. They couldn't have cast a more immature person to play the role, but
You played it well. It was halfway through the show before one of my kids was like, "Daddy, is that Mr. Shane?" It's like, yeah.
So I did a middle part with my hair, which was disgusting. I hate it, but I did it, and it.
One of my
it
kids
helped.
did that, by the way, later that week. Like, look, I'm Mr. Shane.
Oh
Now
no!
it's your trademark. Yeah.
Setting terrible examples for these kids. I don't.
People forgot all about the man bun, and now it's the middle part.
You know, the trends come and go, but
Sorry. So the show is over. You're catching up on life. That's a high.
Yeah,
That's a low.
Or
You're still catching up.
I'm still catching up. But low is that I had Lauren and I had some friends over last night. It was good. We had dinner with them. We hosted. We're still kind of new to the hosting thing, like in adult life, and inviting people over to your home and providing them with food and a good time. So we're doing that. And
That's your high or low?
That's my high.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You said it was your low.
Oh
Yeah.
no! I'm sorry.
I was waiting. I'm like, what happened?
No. Oh no! This is high.
They might be listening, Shane. We talked about this before we hit record.
I hope they are.
Okay.
But no,
My
that was-
low as these friends came over. Oh, terrible.
Immediately turns off the show.
They're hoping that you had dinner with two people last night, two sets of people, so it's not them. Yeah.
No. That was part of the high. We hosted, and it was a good old grand time. We played games, we ate, and it was fun. And then later that night, I was playing Xbox with my brother. Convinced him to play the new-ish Halo game, and I've been trying to convince him for like a year now, and he finally did, and it was fun. And I was like, yes. So.
Okay.
Good things. Yeah, great
Awesome.
things.
What's a job behind you that you're glad is behind you?
Job behind me, I'm glad I'm behind. So two kind of came to mind. First one was before I worked here, I was doing retail at a construction goods store called Menards.
It's like Lowe's, Home Depot in the Midwest.
Yeah, it's like the Midwestern Home Depot. It's called Menards, and
They've got a really catchy jingle.
You save big money. You save big money when you shop Menards.
There it is. Yes.
So- Thanks.
There it is.
Hit all of the buttons.
There it is.
All right. But so the retail part of it is not fun. And then the moment I started working there, this was in the middle of 2020 or beginning-ish, I don't know. And so like a few weeks after I started work there, they started the mask mandate for the company Menards.
Yeah.
And this is like very rural Midwest Wisconsin. And I'm like, oh no. So I got a lot of brunt. I had to work security a few times.
Oh, gosh.
That can't have been fun.
Like literally they locked all the doors except one and just stand there, and like one of our girl cashiers got pushed to the ground by someone who was just like, no, I'm not. No.
Over a mask?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
my God.
Yeah, no, it got violent. It was not fun. So
Yeah.
retail during all of COVID was I didn't work all of COVID. It was only a few months, luckily, before I came here. But that wasn't fun. One more I was going to add. I painted propane tanks for a few summers. It was a really fun
Like
gig, actually.
minions and like characters?
No. Wait, what? Just like the gray color. It was just
all right.
gray.
You ever see people like when you drive through rural Oregon? There's like there's a pumpkin or there's a minion.
I know what you're talking about,
All
but
right.
no, these were just some few times the small like cylindrical ones you'd get at the store
For your barbecue, like your grill?
Yeah, but most of the time it was like home tanks, so like big tanks you see outside, mostly in the rural, but you know.
Okay.
But
You painted them?
yeah, because sometimes they'd look bad. They had the company logo on them, so we would go and clean them up, paint them, make them look good, and
Did you have a stencil for the company logo, or are you freehanding it?
just a sticker.
Oh, okay. On top of your paint.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. He just needed to look good, and that was part of the
Is this a
service.
brush, a spray? What was it?
It was. I mean, you took grinders to it to make it get all the chips and rust off, and then you paint over it, and you could get like 3 or 4 done a day.
Were you wearing a mask for that?
No,
You probably should have been.
I probably have so many. One time I dropped a grinder on my wrist and just ripped that. So yeah, there's some fun stories with that. But the part
This is
of
why we have OSHA. This is why there
Yes.
are all the rules, because of people like you who drop the grinder on your hand.
Yeah. But this was Wisconsin.
Midwest.
Yeah.
It's Midwest. It's lawless land.
Put some salt on it, you'd go throughout your day. But, because it was kind of like the low tier job, but it was a fun job. It was very easygoing. But one of the things you had to do was power washing sometimes. You could power wash the tanks if they brought them back to site. But sometimes you had to power wash the underneath of the trucks, the company vehicles. And I hated that because you've got to wear, basically, you're just underneath the truck, blasting grime and dirt, and it's all coming back at you.
Gross.
And just like, you got to do it. I just hated, that was the worst.
All right.
So, sorry, long-winded answer.
No, that's a good tale. Thank you. Yeah. We'll go to Reverend David LaFore. Lows, highs. We'll let the lady think a little bit longer here. Not that she needs any more time than you. Probably should have done the opposite, but I've already called you out. So
Like switched the job answer like 3 times in my head. We'll see what comes out.
give us all 3.
Low, it was like I shared earlier, I've only been here a week and a half, and it's like, how am I already behind? I don't like what. But I mean, a lot of that's just doing like it's all new, and it's that with the other things going on in my life as well. Still kind of settling in and all that stuff. I'm confident that in itself will pass. I do think there will always be a sense of busyness here.
Yeah.
I'm not going to fool myself into thinking it's...
I haven't been bored for a while.
Yeah. I don't think there's going to be a lot of twiddling my thumbs.
That's where I want to go back and slap my 8-year-old self. How many times did I say, Mom, I'm bored?
Yeah.
God, I don't know how they didn't hit me. I mean, don't hit your kids, but...
Highs, one was doing the Village Green service on Sunday. Literally.
What's Village Green?
Village Green, it's a retirement community out on, I think, First Avenue out here in Federal Way. And we have a few members there. Went there Sunday afternoon to just give God's word and lead a small worship service. There's only like 4 or 5 of us total. We just sat in a circle, and it was nice. It was just, I'm glad I didn't come in with a full sermon. Came in, just talked about the Lord's Prayer. And it was really good, and it connected, I think. And it was fun to do that part of pastoral ministry, not just unloading boxes of books.
There's more to being a pastor than unloading textbooks.
Also, sitting at Dick's Drive-In last night with you, Greta.
We had a lot of fun.
That was nice. It's been a while since I've been there. Jobs. Yeah, I mean, I liked most of the jobs I've ever had. That's, I think, somewhat just kind of my personality. And also I've had some not really terrible jobs, too. I've not really had anyone terrible. Safeway, there was one day in particular, my manager comes up to me. He's flustered looking and is like, we don't have anyone in the meat department. And I was like, that's interesting. You're talking to me. I bag groceries. He's like, you got to go in there. And I really loved selling the meat. I had no idea what I was selling. I loved it. I had a great time. I loved doing a saran wrap around the meat. That was cool. And then cleanup time came and they gave me a hose and I sprayed all this machinery that just had meat on it. And it just like got into my glasses and I had meat like in my sweater. And there was a bucket full of rotting meat. It was like, is this my responsibility? And like, I tried to find my manager, and I think he was like, nope. I can't know. Legally, I can't know what's going on. That's not what he said. This is giving a bad name. This is many years ago. I'm sure that all our local grocery stores and Safeways are good. Also, the other one was camp counseling. I loved camp counseling in general. I went back year after year to do it, but I still have some specific memories. Is like, it was good I was 19 years old. It's good I was 20, because I had like children in the literal rafters of buildings. I'd be like, it's like a sci-fi story with aliens. They're in the ship. They're in the rafters. How did you get here? And then one particular memory I have was working at a mail desk at Concordia University on a weekend. I was covering for somebody, and some person came to me very stressed saying, you need to fax this to my doctor's office. I was born in 1990. Yeah. I do not, by law, I don't know how to fax. There was a long, frustrated conversation with this person. I tried. I think that doctor got something. I don't know what. Something was sent. So
that's amazing. I also worked at a grocery store, and I also got put in the meat department. And I remember people were asking me questions. I was like, I have no idea. and same thing working with equipment. I'm like, I should not be here.
Yeah,
like, I'm certain I should not be handling this.
I feel like it would smell terrible.
It was cold. cold. I didn't remember a smell. I remember being cold.
It did not smell good.
Because any meat you miss, you'll can
find it.
Scent it out later.
All right. Well, our special guest today is Dr. Greta Turnbull. Greta, once again, welcome. Thanks for putting up with shenanigans.
Always.
Lows, highs. What's a job you don't miss?
Highs. Today I work at Gonzaga University and we begin our spring break technically today, but I had class yesterday. So it was Monday of Thanksgiving week. And you can imagine that my students are coming in at 9 a.m. to a class they're required to take that's not in their major.
Yeah.
Super pleased to be there on a 9 a.m. on Monday of Thanksgiving break, but I get to do this thing every year where I tell them that I want to give them something to be thankful for. And so they get there at 9 a.m. and I tell them I'm giving them 10 points bonus, and then they get to go take a nap. They have to go home and take a nap during the time that we would normally talk. So they were very, very happy. And it makes me happy to see them be a little bit more happy at 9 a.m. in the morning. And I got to do the same for 10 a.m. So that was really fun. And those were my freshman classes. My seniors, I made work the whole day. So yeah. I told them that they're old enough that they don't get the Thanksgiving present. But that was super fun. Low, I'm trying to think. There was a lot of time in the airport yesterday. I flew here yesterday and my friend had to drop me off at like 2 and my flight left at like 6. So that was really nice. Thank you, Maria, for dropping me off at the airport. It was really nice to not have to leave my car there, but there was a lot of sitting. And I like people watching, but there's a point when you're tired where the people watching just doesn't cut it anymore.
And Spokane, there aren't as many people as some airports.
No, the airport is very...
GEG.
GEG is lovely, and I love the TSA agents there. They always wish me a good day. There's no line. They pretty much know me by name. They've known me by name in seasons, and yeah.
You also like being at the airport early too. So
I really do. This is something we've talked a lot about, is I really like being at the airport much earlier than David likes being at the airport.
I remember seeing Ben Stein regularly at GEG.
Really?
I don't remember why. We lived in Coeur d'Alene for 5 years, and
that is crazy.
Consistently, when I flew out, he'd be there. He wore like white tennis shoes and slacks.
That's crazy. Maybe he lived in Post Falls or something.
He lived in the area somewhere, but little Spokane. I saw Ben Stein. He was the Ferris Bueller's.
The teacher?
Yep.
Yeah, the teacher guy.
Yeah, okay.
He had a show, Win Ben Stein's Money, a while ago, back when there was TV that I used to watch.
That was kind of odd.
Anyway, so a small airport, not so much people watching, but Seattle, there's lots.
Seattle, a lot of people watching.
And they're worth watching. There are a lot of people and a lot of people.
A lot of things to watch.
Although I will also say it about SeaTac that I used to fly from Seattle to Boston. I went to grad school in Boston, and there's a point at which the Terminal N gets empty, and you have to. There's an 11:30 or there was an 11:50 flight out to Boston, and keeping myself awake to get on the plane, and it's just Terminal N was really sad back in those days, but now it's all fancy and cool. So
Shane's got a story about that, maybe for another day. About trying to stay awake for your flight.
Put yourself on the flight.
I've got a few flight stories for another date.
So that's just a teaser for Shane missing his flight despite getting there 6 hours early. So what's a job that you're thankful is behind you?
So I want to first say I loved the people I worked with at this job. They were some of my favorite people. But I did hotel laundry for 4 summers through grad school. Wow. And it definitely shows you a very different side of humanity. I think when a lot of people go to a hotel, they don't think that a person is going to be cleaning up after them. Yeah. In their brain, I think it's like a robot, maybe. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt that they think a robot does it, because I wouldn't want to assume that people think a human being has to clean up after them. So the way it worked was it was a 27-room hotel, which is pretty small as hotels go, but that meant there was only one person doing laundry, which was me, and there was a long chute that all of the housekeepers would put the laundry in, and I would be bending over the laundry to get it, and then the laundry would hit you over the back of the head, and it wasn't clean laundry. So there were times that there's times I did the laundry just sobbing because I was so miserable at what was all over my hair. But I do think it was like, in a lot of ways, I mean, laundry doesn't really bother me now because I'm like, it's not the laundry of 27 hotel rooms and, random people I haven't met. So I can get it done pretty quickly now, and it doesn't really bother me. But I do sometimes have like actual dreams of like, oh my gosh, I'm back. There's like 4 loads. I'm 4 loads behind. And and you're literally, the thing people don't realize about hotel laundry is you're literally running around the room. Like you do not stop moving. So that machine is going, you're folding something. Like, I was literally running. So you wear running shoes, you wear running tennis shoes, you wear them out by the end of the summer. It was crazy. Yeah. Wow. I don't miss that job. Yeah. I don't miss that job.
So we've got several takeaways already from today's show. we don't always have learning, Shane.
No.
So a couple of my learning so far is people are people. Be nice to them.
Yep.
It's probably, if you're frustrated with somebody at a business, it's probably not their decision.
And they might not have even been trained for this meat counter that they're selling their meat from.
So they're probably not equipped, and they probably don't have the authority to fix it. And they're probably just trying to make ends meet. So that's one of my takeaways. And another one buried in Pastor David's comments is, there are people who are alone. Go visit them and love them. Mm-hmm. Call your grandma, call your dad. Go sit with some old person. Maybe somebody's at the hospital and you're like, should I go? Are we that close? Yeah, go sit with them.
Especially on this week, I feel like with Thanksgiving, we're celebrating Thanksgiving this week. Yeah,
Christmas and other holidays are coming up. It's a good time where people feel that loneliness. So people are people. People are lonely, and let's love each other well. All right, that's a wrap. No, today we're talking about vocation and callings and how we get to serve others. And as mentioned earlier, Dr. Greta Turnbull is a professor at Gonzaga University, professor in philosophy, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
How long have you been doing that?
This is my 4th year, so I'm about halfway through my 4th year there. Yep, and I was teaching before that. I did a research postdoc at Baylor, and then I taught before that at Boston College. So gotten to teach all over the U.S., which is really fun.
Cool. Always philosophy?
Always philosophy, yeah. And almost exclusively, Gonzaga is a Jesuit Catholic school, and Boston College is also a Jesuit Catholic school. Baylor's a Baptist school, so that was exciting. A little bit of a difference for me. But the Jesuit schools tend to require philosophy of all of their students. Yeah. So Gonzaga students have to take 4 philosophy classes, even if they're not awesome. 3 to 4. Some of them can get away with 2. It depends on how they play their cards. But so I during those years, I pretty much exclusively taught students who don't want to be in my classroom, which is really fun. So
it's like confirmation.
Yes.
I'm just kidding.
Except I think, when you say it's really fun, do you actually mean that, or is that kind of like sarcastic?
I feel like it's a challenge. Like, I really like having a challenge. So I started, part of my story starts in a community college environment, and I was a TA for developmental education, which is
the
adults.
Teacher's assistant for those of you who aren't yet in university.
Yes. So so basically, adults who are learning how to read and write for the first time in a college level setting. And I really liked it. I really, the professors I worked for were incredible, and I really liked the challenge of you never got into class and found what you were teaching like necessarily straightforward or easy for the students, and I really like that. So there's been a couple times I've taught classes for philosophy majors. I get to teach one next semester, but for the most part, I'm just like, well, it's easier, and I like the challenge of convincing someone that they don't think this matters to them, that it should matter to them, even a little bit.
Yeah.
Which usually we get just a little bit by the end of it. Yeah.
Nice. So I have a lot of ignorance. Here's an Office reference. Shane, by the way, hasn't watched The Office.
Oh my gosh,
I know.
Shane.
I've seen random episodes.
I try to bring it up every single day. There's an episode where Michael Scott is asking Oscar to explain some accounting term, and he's like, explain it to like a 12-year-old, and he does it. It's like, all right, how about to like a 6-year-old? I'm sure I get the numbers wrong, but that's the point. What's your area of emphasis, focus in philosophy? And pretend like I don't know anything, which won't take too much pretending energy.
Okay. So my official title is that I'm a social epistemologist, which I like to say just because it sounds cool, and it gives you sort of like a label for what I'm going to talk about. But epistemology is the study of knowledge or belief, and how do we know when a belief is trustworthy or not trustworthy? So I study that, but I specifically study how that works in social groups. So when I learn something from you about, let's say, Revelation, and then Pastor David tells me something completely different about Revelation, who am I supposed to believe?
Me.
I mean, I knew you were going to say that, but am I supposed to go with the associate or the senior, you know, in these cases? Yeah. So thinking about how our social lives affect what we believe and what we know to be true.
So you said social epistemology?
Yes, social epistemology. So now you can go around using that at airports or whatever.
Are you a social epistemologist?
Yes, I'm a social epistemologist. Yeah.
So that's what your emphasis is on, or for your doctorate?
Yeah, my doctorate was on that, and then my research has slowed in the last couple of years, but most of my research is on that too. So, and I do a lot of that. One of the cool things that I've gotten to do is a lot of my PhD was in biology as well. So I get to work with scientists in biology labs and talk to them about like, how are your disagreements with the other scientists affecting your work and those sorts of things. Oh, cool. So getting to be in some paleontology labs has been really cool. And
All right. See, there you go. You had to dig up, that's actual dinosaurs and not potsherds. Very
Whole
cool.
life.
So I know different universities do it differently, and some universities, it seems like research is a major emphasis. Others are teaching. What is your role there?
So previously I was at a research position at Baylor, but now I get to be at a teaching position. So I would say probably 60% of my job, 70% of my job is student contact, which is really great. I am also, one of my new jobs this year I added was have a position in student life where I'm a dorm mom. So I live with 99 college students. It's really fun. And it's a big adventure. So far we haven't had a fire alarm, so that's what I've been really excited about. No midnight waking up and standing out in the snow.
Nice.
But yeah, so most of my time, I do a lot of stuff for the university. That's like a lot of things. I think a lot of things that people don't realize about faculty is that we have to run the university in a major way. Mm-hmm. So I'm on a lot of committees that do really boring things that nobody knows has to be done, and a lot of committees where we do really cool things. Like I get to serve as one of the faculty representatives to athletics. So I work with faculty who are thinking about athletics and how we support our student athletes,
nice.
which at Gonzaga is really cool because we have some really successful teams right now. Yeah. So yeah, most of it is that, and then about 10% is research right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about kind of influences in your life, but I also recognize, or I'm assuming that you probably have a certain interest in philosophy, which may or may not be related to the profession of professor. So I'm imagining that somebody who might be really interested in thinking and researching a topic kind of follows that, and then this is me just being ignorant, that you get to the end of that and you realize, okay, well, there's nothing to do with this except be a professor now. So I'm curious, did you have more influences shaping you? I want to be a professor, and this is what I could teach, or I'm really interested in this thing, and I guess I could teach it?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, at least in my field, tend to have that story you just told of, I'm really interested in this thing, I want to learn more about it, and now I get to teach it. For me, I think being a philosopher was kind of my dad's idea. So it was, I think in his mind, he was making me into it. He was really excited I was going to be a researcher. And then I got to the writing papers part of it, and I can do that. But my favorite part of writing a paper is sharing it with people. And for a lot of people, that's their least favorite part of the process. So going to conferences is my favorite part of the research cycle. And a lot of people, that's oh man, that's going to be that's going to be a rough weekend or whatever. So, but for me, the reason I've stayed in it has been because I really love having conversations with 18 to 22 year olds. And I really love walking with students who are figuring out, how do I think about myself and the world and my place in it on my own? And, now that, my parents are not in the picture in the same way they were. They're a phone call away, but that's usually about how close they are. And so getting to walk with the students through that really developmental time of their life has been super, super fun. And philosophy lets me do that because the questions we're asking in my class are okay, well, what does a just society really look like? And how do we pursue that together? And my students have a lot of thoughts. So I'm always learning things, and it's been super fun. I don't ever really teach in my research. So most of what I'm doing is just having those sort of basic nuts and bolts conversations with students, which is super fun.
It's like being a pastor. I mean, I don't know. I guess there's probably a lot of overlap between our Master of Divinity seminary education, but there's also an enormous amount of our coursework ever. Maybe it's underneath the surface, or maybe it's in the background, but it seems like no one's ever asked me about the hypostatic union.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Janus Maestaticum. It's not really being thrown at me a lot.
Not yet. No.
And I'll say from my experience, just having talked with some of our students, I mean, I don't want to get into how you teach, but it involves games and whatnot. And these students are telling the stories about this class a year or 2 years later. And I can definitely tell that's really what you enjoy about that, because it is a social engagement, and it's exactly what you said. It was getting people who wouldn't typically, philosophy is not, they're doing it because it's required. But getting them to engage in a way that, sure, they're not going to go off to write a philosophy paper, but they're thinking more about their world and how things happen and what people's, ideas and motivations are. And I think that's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you mentioned your dad was a key influence. Again, in my ignorant and stereotypical sort of cliche mind, there's certain professions where parents are don't do that, you'll never get a job. Don't be a writer or an artist or a theologian or a philosopher. You're going to just be a barista.
Yes.
or musician, right? Like get a real degree so you can get a real job. But Dad was a positive influence in this.
Dad's a positive influence. So I grew up, the short version of the story is I grew up in a very specific area of conservative evangelicalism where fathers choose the careers for their daughters, but they do not for the sons. So my brother gets to do sports management. He's doing really great. I'm super proud of him. So yeah, my dad, I think, had wanted to do philosophy, and my parents are both like, they were really consistent about like, we don't really care if you make money. We just like really want you to do what you're good at. And so, yeah, that was like from my very young age, I was like he would sit me down and be like, you should read Plato. And I was like, no, I'm so bored. And then I would say no. And then they would be like, well, what if we assigned it to you for school? And I'd be like, well, I guess I have to do it then. And it took me until about college, midway through college, to realize like I really enjoy the conversations that are happening in philosophy. But it took me being around younger philosophers and people who were really, my first philosophy professor was a whitewater raft guide who was like doing philosophy as his like side hustle for a while and teaching. Yeah. And so he was always like, yeah, I almost died in this ice cave. And then he'd be like, oh, and by the way, Kant has some really interesting things to say.
Speaking of the categorical imperative.
Yeah, and then you'd be hooked, right? There was no question. So yeah, I knew I liked college, working with college students pretty young. So like, my parents had been in campus ministry for a long time. So I knew that was kind of the place I really enjoyed. Yeah.
That's a super early start to learn philosophy.
Yeah, it's very early. Yeah, it's very early. Yeah.
I remember I was about to be a senior in high school, and then I could have taken a college credit, and my mom was like, you should take philosophy. I was like, I've heard that word before. Like, I've never had a reason to study it. Yes. So, yeah. Super early.
I'm really confused. I don't know, torn. So you're a philosopher and a professor, and in my head, those are very different things. And yet, so I'm trying to pinpoint like your vocation in some ways is really both. And so I'm trying to think of like training. I can picture training for a philosopher. Did you also have specific training to be a professor?
I wish. I had some. So in grad school, we had this teaching seminar that meant, get this, during grad school, 4:30 to 6:50 p.m. on Fridays. So it was pretty murderous.
Friday evening?
Friday evening, yes. Oh. So you're already just absolutely dead. You're so dead. And then you go in for the teaching seminar, which is the thing I was really excited about, but it can be really overwhelming. Yeah. So we had teacher training, but it was pretty much the first year was like, you're going to need to teach your own college class. And we heard from a lot of people who had done that. And then the next year they were like, did you have a syllabus written? And go do this on your own. And we got checked in once during the year. So I was really young. I did Running Start. So I was 20 when I started teaching college courses. And that was like a pretty rough go because I had students who were significant, 2 years older than me who could figure that out. I looked very young. So, but the training, I feel like a lot of it was on the job, and then going to other professors I really liked and being like, hey, can I learn from you? I have this student and I'm trying to work through this issue. And a lot of that I think is hard because there's so many different, like, how do you balance grace for a student, or how do you balance challenging them and those sorts of things? And I think a lot of that you just kind of have to learn through trial and error, kind of like being a pastor some of the time. You learn what works and what doesn't, and what's helpful to people and what isn't. And and then I had like formal philosophy training that was probably the most, that was what consumed grad school for the most part. So the teaching training was like a nice sidebar to all of that. Yeah.
Were those colleagues receptive to like being helpful? And sure, it's different every setting, but I also imagine there are certain situations where it's maybe competitive and people are fighting for positions, whether, officially or subtly. And so what was your experience? Were people happy to help, or are they kind of reticent to give their tips?
It definitely depended. I think in at least philosophy, research tends to be the place where people are most competitive. And so if you had a paper published, then people would be like, oh no, we have to gun for that person, But if you were a good teacher, people were just kind of annoyed by it. They were like, oh, I'm not a good teacher. I don't get good scores and she does. Like, that's annoying. Yeah. And I need to figure out how to make sure she feels bad about it or something. So that happened pretty regularly. But the professors who I would go to for help, they would be people who were like passionate teachers who I knew were just like student focused, student first. And that's what I've experienced at Gonzaga, was just a lot of people who just care about their students. So that's been really special to get to be in an environment that's just like that. Yeah.
David, do you remember your pastor's educator class?
Yeah.
Oh, I want to hear about this.
Well, it's just, the best part about that class was when we actually got put into a classroom to teach. And I got to be honest, maybe other people get something out of it, but being told how to teach in a lecture just doesn't work for me unless
the irony, huh?
And I don't know how you could. I'm not the one, I don't want to criticize. I can't remember it was Dr. Schulteis. I can't remember who it was. I don't want to criticize how the class was set up, because I don't know how I would teach people to teach other than get you in a classroom in front of students and they'll react to you and you kind of figure it out. But also hopefully there's a way to do it, not just completely just throw people into the fifth graders, which is what happened to me. I enjoyed it. They're an odd group of people. They're odd nuts, fifth graders are. But.
Yeah, they are. I got one at home. Yeah. Education itself is its own degree and field.
Yeah.
And so to have a degree in something and then almost as an afterthought or on the side do this thing, which becomes what the bulk of your time is.
Yeah.
So as pastor, I had one class and it was boring lecture for most of it, and then something of a field experience lab where I was assigned to a Lutheran school and it was third or fourth graders, and I feel like I was just a helper in the room.
For 4 weeks.
Yeah, I don't think I got to say much, and if I did, it was just teach the Bible story. Yeah. And I didn't get feedback. The teacher was just like, I'm going to the bathroom. I need a coffee. I'm out. Keep everybody alive.
Given lesson plans, I remember one in particular is the story of Jericho. Use this to talk about baptism. And I was like, what? I just had to teach this up front. All right.
All right. Here we go.
Yeah. One class for something that we do more than preaching. If you look at the hours spent teaching versus preaching.
Yeah. So I imagine it's
very similar.
It's probably true in a lot of people's fields. I don't know. Shane, as a musician, does your training line up with what you actually spend your time doing?
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
reading key signatures and
I mean, there's just the knowledge part of it, to just be educated, but also a lot of observing, and then a lot of up front of the class. I didn't get a lot of time in front of other people, teaching or directing other people, but I did a lot in front of the class. So I guess that helped. Yeah. Probably was supposed to do some, but
it all worked out.
It worked out. Yeah.
So Greta, I don't know how to ask this question well. Here's my my pretend philosopher way of describing it. What's the telos of what you're up to?
So what is the goal or end point or function?
Yeah, big picture, and I guess you could answer either as philosopher or professor of philosophy, but people probably see what you do with certain perspectives and lenses of this is what it means or what it is or what she's trying to do. But in your words, what's the aim, goal, end of what it is you're called to do?
Well, you used the word telos, which is Aristotle's favorite word, and all my students would know that I hate Aristotle.
So there you go.
So yeah, you're starting it off on a good.
How do you feel about candy corn?
So I think about it through a lot of different lenses, and this is something actually my pastors have helped me think through. Is that I used to think of my work as this is only for the 5 academics who read the papers I publish or whatever. That was pretty depressing. If you're putting in, I had a paper published last year that I think I've been working on for 7 years. So if you're putting in that much work over that long period of time and 5 people read it, that one I don't think 5 people have read it. I think we're down up to 3 right now. So yes, 3 is a big number. But yeah, it didn't feel very fulfilling. And it also was difficult to feel okay, well, if this is, I think every Christian is called to faithfulness. And so I was convinced that it was part of what it meant to be faithful with the gifts I was given. But it didn't, I sort of was struggling with that. And eventually I think I've come to a place where I think of it through multiple lenses. So I think about caring for the students I live with and teach. And there's some overlap there. Some of the students I live with, I also teach. And what does that look like? Well, it's so it's individualized to the student and what role I'm going to play in their life. I might play a role for 2 weeks. It might be a semester. There's some students I've, kept on my care list for 4 years and gotten to see them graduate and hear from them now that they're off doing wonderful things. So yeah, just caring for people and using that opportunity. A lot of students come into college afraid of professors. They've been told by their high school teachers for the entire time, well, this won't fly in college, you know? And then they meet me and they're like, I should be scared of you. And it's like, no, I'm just here to care for you however you need. So that's one lens. And then I think about my research now. I tend to think about philosophy as just thinking really slowly and deeply about things and carefully, and maybe not coming to it with some ideas about what the answer might look like, or at least a very defined ideas about what the answer might look like. And so I think about myself as like both a member of the Church Universal as well as a member of a local church, where I'm hopeful that long term my research helps people inside and outside of the church think about big problems that the church is facing in a way that might feel a little bit more accessible sometimes than opening a Bible. For some people, opening a Bible is the scariest or weirdest or strangest thing they will do all week. But they are often willing to have a conversation with me. And I've found that that's been really fascinating when I'm on an airplane or something and someone asks me what I'm doing or what I do for work, and I say I'm a philosopher. People instantly have questions. They instantly want to have a conversation. Usually it's like, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around, did anyone hear it? But usually you get in really cool conversations. So I think
Pastor's the opposite. People are like, okay, never mind.
Yeah, no, I try to hide because it shuts down a conversation so quick.
Nothing kills it much quicker than
Oh, cool.
Yeah, great. Don't tell me anything more, please.
Or like at the wedding reception, they'll assign you to the seating, and then like you sit down, and people are like, oh, like who did I upset to get to sat with the pastor?
Well, my mother's at the table.
Yeah. Awesome.
I won't say anything bad now.
So people are engaged with that.
People are engaged. And I hope that's true for, both people. I think there's a lot of fear around philosophy in the church. I've definitely experienced that. I remember growing up and sometimes I would come home from grad school and people would say, oh, are you not a Christian anymore? And I'd be like, what? Where did you hear that from? Well, it's just because you're studying philosophy now, and it's right. So I know there's a lot of fear for people. I think some of that fear feels legitimate to them. I don't think it is necessarily legitimate, but there's a lot of fear. And I think there's a lot of fear for teenagers who are growing up in the church. What's going to happen when I get to college? There's fear around, like, how do we have conversations with the culture that's around us in a way that's actually, like, meaningful to both sides? And I think a philosopher is, like, uniquely positioned to be able to help people sort of, like, take a deep breath and think through and how to have those conversations. So, yeah, that's sort of where my research is going long term. But right now, I probably couldn't explain any of my papers to you, to a 6-year-old Oscar. In the office.
I don't take that.
I
as
can
an insult.
try, but it's just not. And that's part of it. Is I want my research to be interesting to people who don't know what I'm talking about. And right now, most of what I've written.
Is that frustrating?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Sometimes I ask David, I'll say, when was the last time you heard me talk about a paper? And what do you say?
You don't. And a couple times I've asked you, it sounds like Dr. Seuss talking back to me. It rhymes less. It's less pleasing to the ears. It's like, is that made up?
Yeah. And he's very supportive and like, I know that cool. I could do it. Yeah, I can invest time in it. He's very supportive of whatever good things come out of it. But it's very like, it's not. I want it to be motivating in a way. I want it to be the things I'm thinking about that at the end of the day when I call him and I'm like, hey, I was thinking about that. Like, and I do this all the time. I was thinking about this and like how it affects the church or how it's affecting culture.
That gets you fired up.
That gets me really fired up. And I'll just say, like, I've written a lot of papers on something called underdetermination, and it just doesn't get me fired up.
Okay. You seem to like the math stuff. They pretty much do math. It's math,
I do really like math.
Analytical.
Yes. Yeah. I'm an analytic philosopher, so I had to do a lot of logic in grad school, and I get to teach that to students now. It's really fun.
See, that's what I'm saying. I think that would be a terribly frustrating existence because I took, some basic philosophy classes and learned, here's a handful of fallacies. And then you look around the world and you realize this is just the air everyone is breathing. Like
you just opened my eyes to it.
Yeah, like and the world is just a broken place of despair. Like whatever your cable news channel is, nothing they're saying is valid.
Yeah.
Like it's all straw men. It's all it's just
it doesn't matter what side you're on either.
Exactly.
It doesn't at all. Yeah.
And so like that's such a grievous burden to realize it's all pretend. And like it's like little kids have a like the student body president in elementary school, and there's no real platform. It's like they give out candy corn, I'm voting for them, and like it's no different at Fox or CNN. Like, it's just, there's something I like about you, and they're gross, and that's the opposing,
the ick factor we talk about it a lot.
Like, the pro and con is, but they're stupid, and they gave me candy corn, and that's how we're making our policy.
It's a very Plato's cave. Just staring at your stuff in the cave.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because there was a season of grad school where I decided that I would spend the year reading Ecclesiastes and Romans.
Yeah.
And it was probably 4 or 5 months into reading Ecclesiastes, and I think I read Romans every couple weeks and then Ecclesiastes every week. And my doctoral advisor brought me into the office, and he said, I've really liked working with you. And I was like, oh, this is a weird beginning. He's like, I've really liked working with you, but can I just say, what's up? Because you've been super depressed for the last, and it was exactly when I started reading Ecclesiastes. And I was like, well, you started reading Ecclesiastes. He's like, please promise me you won't read it anymore until you're done. You can't take it. It's just too much. Because I do think there's a piece of philosophy even that feeds into that despair. And I think I love Ecclesiastes. I love reading that. I love feeling lament. I love the Psalms. Yeah. I love the imprecatory Psalms. That's kind of my jam.
Yeah. I preached on that last year during Lent. I preached on dashing the babies on the rocks.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah, it's good. Those are human
emotions. People were
emotions.
not comfortable during that one. Yeah.
People don't want to feel those emotions, right? I think philosophy is a nice venue to start feeling that. But yeah, I get that a lot with my students who leave I teach we call it baby logic, but intro to logic class, and where they learn the fallacies and stuff. And a lot of students are like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
They're everywhere. And
I think I'd be frustrated in a lot of conversations just because you said thinking deeply and slowly, or slowly and deeply.
Yeah.
And realizing that that's not normal.
Yeah.
I think that would be frustrating for me to be aware of the processes that could and should be happening, and how people, myself included, are making enormous leaps and assumptions that aren't valid, and to you be sitting across the table and knowing the gaps.
Yeah, well, I think the antidote to that weirdly has been being in professional philosophy, because I've been in so many rooms where I was around just incredibly brilliant people who were not making those mistakes, right? Who were just on the money, some of the most brilliant people living in the world. Or I would meet the most brilliant living philosopher of insert topic here. Mm-hmm. And they were lovely people, but it did not... Being right doesn't bring anyone joy. It doesn't necessarily mean they're a good friend. It doesn't even mean they're a good person, on a very basic moral level. So I think the antidote to that has been oh, well, these are the people, my students, I love them dearly. They make the same mistakes on the papers every single semester. Mm-hmm. And what keeps me going is that getting to love these individual students. And what keeps me from cynicism is, oh, that student that I just got to know and their story is making the mistake that 400 students before them. And I'm going to gently correct them. But getting to know them as people has definitely, it's definitely helped. Otherwise, I know that I had friends. I mean, grad school was the worst of this, right? You're around a group of, you're brought into a philosophy program with 5 or 6 other people. Okay. You're a really small cohort. You get to know each other really well. You're around 4 or 5 other groups of years that have gone before you. And everyone's just I would walk into the office on a normal day and you're hearing conversations in 2 to 3 different languages, including English, because everyone can switch back and forth. Everyone's fluent in multiple languages. You're having someone do some crazy math logic problem on the board. And it's super nerdy and super fun. It wasn't exactly always pleasant to work there. A lot of really brilliant people does not make a happy room. So there were definitely fun moments. I remember being wow, these people are nerdy I am.
We have a lot of fun around here. What does that mean? Wait a second.
Real simple.
Keep things
that's what I'm saying, though. I'm saying that's what makes life meaningful.
There's a certain bliss that comes with our ignorance, Shane.
Yeah, there is.
That's awesome.
I want to take a step back, as far as philosophy and what you do goes. So Pastor Dan asked, what's your goal for philosophy? But I think for a lot of our listeners at home, a lot of us, each of us at the table have had some kind of courses in theology or philosophy, but I think the average listener probably doesn't know what, I don't know, maybe couldn't define the surface level of theology or philosophy. So how would you define philosophy and what you do in its simplest terms? Do you like
Opening lecture 101.
Oh, 101, yes,
I
yeah.
just think all day we're trying to find the purpose of life. How does the brain work? Or how is
the good life?
That's a great question, Shane. And I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people, my little brother called me once, McAdam, when he was like, I was in grad school, he must have been 8 or something. And he said, I'm learning about professions. And I was like, oh, this is going to be good, right? He goes, I've learned what a policeman does. I've learned what a fireman does. Those sound like really cool jobs, Greta. And I was like, I'm sure 8-year-old boy, that sounds like a great
Archaeologist.
job. Yes, exactly. These all sound like really good jobs. And then he goes, but I can't figure out what it is that you do. Yeah. And I was like, he's like, and then I got to thinking, and I think that you think about questions like, if the world's time stopped, would we even know? Because our heartbeats would stop and our awareness of time passing would stop. And then
you said 8-year-old?
He was 8. And he's a sports management major.
Her whole family's like this. It's actually quite frustrating.
Yeah.
They're all just...
it was crazy. But it was such a good question. It made me think about philosophy differently because I think he was right. What in the world do I do? Or one of my students asked me, they were like, I know what a biologist does. They go in their lab and they learn things, they experiment on things, and then something turns out right or wrong, right? And then they write about it in a paper. But that can't happen in a philosopher doesn't have a lab. So the way I think about it most is that philosophy is interested in answering the fundamental questions underlying reality. So we have,
that, Shane?
Yeah,
answering.
That's on the test. Actually, I usually put that on the test.
Fundamental reality.
Noted.
I think I usually put stubborn attempt to answer fundamental questions about reality. So questions like, is there a God? That's a question. Do we have good reason to believe in a God, even if there is a God? There's some really interesting work being done in philosophical theology now. So we have philosophers who both have philosophy PhDs and theology PhDs who are thinking about working out, like, how does the Christian tradition really work out philosophically and all those sorts of things. I found those conversations incredibly interesting. One of my really dear friends, Charity Anderson at Baylor, she writes about the problem of divine hiddenness, which is just this idea that in the midst of suffering and
sounds like a very
evil,
Lutheran topic, by the way.
Evil, yeah. How do we make sense of the fact that for many people the existence of God just doesn't seem obvious or even accessible? Like, you have a lot of people saying, I want to believe in a God, but I don't see any evidence for him, and yet I'm around all these church people who think think it's really obvious that God exists and God is good and God loves me.
You got the Latin there, David? Deus abscondis or something like that?
I won a lot of points with her early in our relationship by not pretending to know. Like, I didn't try to pretend I knew anything about philosophy.
He did earn a lot of points.
Theology to her, which is good.
He did earn a lot of points. I remember calling my friends early on and being like, this new guy, like, he thinks awesome. I know things. It's really great.
I did try to explain divine hiddenness to her, and I'm really thankful she's coming at me with stuff I'd never read about. I was like, oh yeah, that sounds good too.
Well said.
I one time came to him and I was like, I think I've fallen more in love with you. And he was like, why? And I'd found Machiavelli's The Prince on his shelf. He's like, honey, that's a really violent book. I was like, yeah, but you read it and you never assumed I didn't read it. So it was really great.
Yeah, I read it. I did. For a college class, which means it was probably very quickly done.
Yeah.
The night before.
On the way to class.
Spark notes.
Okay, how to take over small
country. And then we also have ethics, so questions about what's good, what's right. Some of my friends in philosophy do incredible work. They're hospital ethics consultants, especially during COVID. They had trauma call. They literally had philosophers walking around with phones on them, like special pager phones, so that if there was a debate about how to put ventilators in hospitals, that the philosopher would be called to consult on that. Wow. I mercifully did not get asked to do that. I was really relieved because those were really hard decisions to make. So there's all sorts of interesting, and then there's the logic side, which is just math, and I don't like math, but I love logic. So
it looks exactly the same.
It's not the same.
It looks so close.
So close.
I feel like Pastor Dan would love the logic.
I'm interested in all this. I'm interested in a lot of things. As you talk about ethics there and the good life and going back to a philosopher thinks deeply and slowly. One of the things that sounds refreshing to me in all, as much as I said, much of this leads just to despair.
Yes, it does.
At least in me. I think one of the things I appreciate that is refreshing is recognizing that with a question of ethics, for example, the fact that you can think deeply and slowly from a variety of viewpoints or perspectives or kind of whatever your starting assumptions are is a really beautiful and important reminder to me that despite what you read on social media or watch in the cable news, it's not obvious, and other people aren't always dumb. It seems like most discourse is they're evil or dumb for not seeing my completely obvious and clear perspective here.
I'm going to be that philosopher and say that's what I wrote my dissertation on, which was super fun. Yeah.
I mean, I love that.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean there's no truth or it's all relative.
No.
And I think that's the other fear. People are like, well, if I give them too much credit, or if I explore their point of view, I might end up thinking or saying there is no truth and it's all relative. But to say, I believe there is a right and wrong, and I can understand how people could come to 12 different conclusions of when we should unplug this breathalyzer or ventilator or whatever it is.
No, there's a really big beauty of that. And the funny thing about it that I discovered writing my dissertation, which again is something I don't think this is the most I've ever talked to you about my dissertation, is that the funny thing that I came across was that was actually kind of a controversial view in philosophy, that two people could have different views on something and both be thinking correctly, even if one of them was wrong and one of them was right.
Or they're both wrong.
Which nobody likes to think about that. Nobody likes to think about that one. But and having conversations with people as I was writing it over the years about a lot of people are scared, and especially I think intergenerationally, there's a lot of intergenerational fear. Can I have conversations and disagree between generations, and have it be respectful and welcome, and the disagreement not be a sign that something is wrong with us or with the world? It's actually can be a sign of something good. Like something we talk about a lot in our relationship is that when we disagree, it's a beautiful thing because we get to bring our full selves. That means we're not hiding from each other, right? We're bringing our full selves to the table. And I wish that we got to experience that more in society, that we got to be like, oh yeah, I actually disagree with you. And it doesn't mean I don't like you. Yeah.
And one thing that you've really cemented for me is like, it's just a lot more interesting to know that people out there are full people with complete understandings of things, and I may not agree, or like, okay, I'm going to give up all my points and agree with your points now, but it's just a lot more full and 3D and colorful of a world that way.
It feels like a very I'm sorry, language escapes me a lot, but almost like a cerebral empathy of
intellectual humility, we call it in philosophy.
But not that I think I can track with that, but more than just I feel what you feel or I know what you're feeling, but to say, let me walk down your path of logic to get there, so we can come to a different conclusion, and I can see how that's a really valid and true way of getting there, and you're not bad or manipulative or dumb or evil, and so I can empathize with your, and it's probably not the right word, but it feels like a cerebral empathy to me.
Yeah, totally.
But different than just the kind of intellectual humility a little bit, but I can walk in your shoes to get to your thoughts.
And Alan Jacobs talks about this. He has this great book, How to Think, that David and I have both read. And I teach it most semesters to my first year students, where he says that's a risky thing to do, what you just described there, because it means that you trust the person. To sit in someone else's shoes, you have to trust that they're not on a long con manipulating you, right? Mm-hmm. Or that you won't lose hold of the things, your convictions and values that you hold really strong. And that's a risk, right? And I think people want to say, oh, the risk is not worth taking. But I think every time I've taken it with my students or my colleagues or those sorts of things, it just the relational benefits are huge. And it didn't involve me giving up those convictions or values, right?
Yeah. Is that the same Alan Jacobs who writes about C.S. Lewis and story and
Baylor,
narrative and stuff?
Yes. Cool. Yeah, big Alan Jacobs fan. He's good.
Yeah. I like his book on testimony or
something like that.
Turning point. And I can't think of what it's called right now. Looking back and looking forward, maybe.
I don't know.
He's got a book on like testimony.
Okay.
And anywho, sorry. This is fascinating to me. I love the idea of that full human or 3D engaging one another in a just a deeper way that frankly sounds a little bit exhausting.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time in your own thinking, I imagine. And also where I fail considerably is taking time to listen well and to try to understand and not just get my words in.
Alan Jacobs calls that refutation mode. So that moment when you flip the switch, right, and you're just gonna tell the person they're wrong. You're not even listening to what they're saying back, you know? And I think that happens in so many relationships, and my students and I practice. How do we have that when we're just like, oh my gosh, that student or that TikToker or that Instagram poster, whatever it is, I don't even want to listen to them. I just want to comment about how terrible they are, right? We all have that instinct in us, and it's about talking. I think it's about usually Alan Jacobs says the secret is taking a deep breath and going to garden, but
growing a garden?
Growing a garden and going out to the garden. So I feel like you would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Taking a moment. That's to let things cool down. And
I think I do the same thing even when I agree, though, not just refutation. I agree, and then I assume I know where they're going, and I assume I know how they got there, and I'm no longer listening to what they're saying or their process, because I might agree with their conclusion, but they may have taken a very different road to get there. Or we might be on the same road, but they're actually going somewhere else. And so I think that the danger of not listening, whether I'm refuting or agreeing or finishing their thought, I'm just a really bad listener all around. Man. Thank you, Greta. This has been really edifying. I'm going to sit in the corner and eat candy corn and cry for a little bit. This is good. Shane, just mute my mic, would you?
I don't know how much more time we have, but I do have a question for when we talk about this.
You're muted, don't worry.
Intellectual humility, empathy, all that stuff. Do you guys talk about that in your circles in academia? Is that something that like you try to, or certain figures or certain people try to challenge themselves and challenge others on? I mean, I figure it's.
So I wrote a paper on this once. I did some time ago. I guess I think 12 people read it. So it was one of my bigger papers. I know 12. So it's interesting because they did a survey recently of a bunch of professors. I don't know how many years ago this came out, but it was across professors. And one of the questions was, do you think you are usually the smartest person in the room at work? And I want you to remember where professors go to work, at a place where almost everyone has a terminal degree, right? And like something like over 70% of them believed they were the smartest person in the room at work, which is terrifying. Right? Like, and makes sense of a lot of things about academia if you realize that's like descriptive of what's going on. So yeah. So I think we talk about it. We love having, there's all sorts of, you can go to conferences that are just on humility. It's a very big research field right now where we just are talking about humility. It's a huge, like, in order to be like, if I was advising a young grad student and they're like, I want to write my dissertation on humility. I mean, you've got like 60 or 70 papers to read before you're even remotely caught up to where the field is right now on humility. So super interesting. I know, right?
I didn't even know that was a
well done, Dave.
Oh, yes.
I really didn't know that was a thing.
It's a very big thing right now. Yeah, it's a very big thing right now. And fortunately, I'm not in that literature. One of my dear co-authors, Eric Sampson over at Rhodes College, he knows that literature and brought a lot of that to the table for a paper we wrote together. But again, how much time are we spending? It's like when sometimes I go to conferences that are mostly theologians that have like a philosopher addition onto it. And sometimes I think, wow, like we're in this room talking about the salvation story, or we're talking about some really deep concept in Christian counseling or something like that. But everyone in this room is fighting with each other about these things. The Q&A is really acerbic, or like people are asking questions to hurt each other and to catch each other.
That means like mean and biting.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Gosh. I only have a master's degree.
Combining epistemology and humility for a second here. My question that I sometimes it's a embarrassing question for me, but I've wrestled with it with a number of pastors before, is I asked a group of pastors, what's the last thing you've changed your mind about that mattered? Not like I thought I didn't like spicy mustard, but now I do.
Should
but
be
like,
our opening
she
question.
literally asked this as like a question on a date.
Oh my! I love it. I love that question.
Early on,
I think I asked it on our maybe first date.
And my answer has now changed since then.
Okay.
Philosophers, is that your answer?
But I felt like we had some conversation.
Yeah, we had some conversation, and I used to ask that on first dates pretty regularly, actually, because I still tell. I have a lot of little sisters, so I tell them to ask that question because it tells a lot about a person if they can say. And sometimes when I'd ask the question on dates, pre-David, this is not David, guys would say, oh, I guess I kind of like pizza a little bit more,
Blondes, or, something.
Right, exactly. It would be something really, really like self-implicating, whatever the answer would be. And I can't remember what you said. I'm sorry. But I remember being encouraged that you had thought something. Oh, I think I changed your mind about, or you were like more open to some scripture interpretation that I was pushing.
Something out of Genesis.
Out of Genesis. We were arguing about Genesis very early. That should not surprise you, a philosopher and a theologian dating. We argue about theology for most of our times together. It's super fun, and I think I presented an interpretation you hadn't heard before, and then backed it up, and of course, it's like here's all my evidence. And
no, it was good.
It was really encouraging for me to see. My
answer for you for that first time was I essentially just talked about pastoral care, how you can be right about something and still wrong, and that was it's
a good lesson.
Like, I don't know if that fully answered, because I don't know if that really changed my mind, but it changed my attitude.
Oh no, but it made me like you more, so it was successful.
It worked. All right, nice work, David.
Job here's
done. I was had somebody in the microphone. He went to humility lessons, whatever.
That works. As Christians, I think that's such a profound question. So I was talking to pastors to say, when's the last time you changed your mind on something? And it was almost nothing.
So
and then to say, just to pause, observe what we're inviting people into. If we're going to make disciples of all nations, is you're asking them to change their entire view of God, the world, themselves, like everything. And you haven't even changed your view on like one of your party's platform pieces. Like you can't even give on anything. And we're asking people to say, hey, why don't you throw out all of your heritage and values and view of the world and jump into my world?
And potentially lose family in the process, right? But don't worry. Yeah, we're fine.
Like that's just, it's a very humbling thing to ask of someone else if we have almost no experience. I've never changed religions. My views of the world maybe tweak a little bit, but I haven't had any just 180 of like, whoa, I woke up dizzy because I see the world in a different way now. Anyway.
Yeah, it's a crazy, it's a very, and we actually have a name for that in philosophy.
Oh, please.
If you want the name,
me.
It's called a transformative experience.
Okay.
So there's actually...
You say conversion in theology, but...
Yeah, okay.
Changing vocabulary.
More syllables.
But the transformative experience is really interesting because they literally write papers on, if you became a vampire tomorrow, what about your world would change? And like, what would that be like to be you? Would you still be you if you were a vampire? I don't know. I don't know that I would date you anymore, David.
I feel like that gets into the ship. The
Theseus ship. Yeah, the switching ships thing. Yeah, anyway, but it's super interesting because a lot of philosophers have done work on pregnancy. That's widely viewed as a transformative experience for a lot of women. And religious conversion gets a lot of talked about a lot in that. And the interesting thing about philosophy is we have a lot of adult converts to both Catholicism and Protestant Christianity. Yeah. So you have a lot of people who've recently been through this experience who want to write about it.
Like towards?
Yes, towards. Yeah, so philosophy has really...
Probably away as well.
Yeah, I'd imagine.
Yeah, there's some away. But philosophy's had a Christian resurgence since like the late 90s. It used to be that there were pretty much no philosophers who were openly identified as Christians. And now there are lots of us, which by that, I mean, we think there are about 80 to 90 Christian identifying women and philosophers in the U.S., maybe the world. So there's not a lot. And then I think probably our last we have a conference together. We all get together. And I think usually a couple hundred people show up to that. So it's really fun it's really fun. And there's lots of momentum that way. So yeah, I think a lot of people broadly public people think, oh, well, there's no way people are converting to Christianity in that seasons, but a lot of people do. But they come through very nerdy conversions, they're reading Thomas Aquinas one day and it suddenly hits them. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. It's really fascinating.
This is awesome. I'm so thankful for this conversation today.
This is so much fun.
I feel like I could keep talking, which in some ways is the point. I mean, not just of philosophy and being Professor Shane. What are you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, stealing my thunder. I was going to say, like, what a perfect topic to talk about on a show that's about continuing the conversation.
Yeah,
I think philosophy definitely goes hand in hand with with our whole show, like mentality. Like,
yeah, that tagline. They were talking about everything that had happened.
Oh, we endlessly talk in philosophy. Yeah.
And that can probably be frustrating at times when it's just talking for talking's sake or debating for debating's sake, which I enjoy.
That never happens. I don't know.
Yeah. But the goal of our podcast is to talk about real life, talk about things that matter, to slow down, as we were talking earlier, Greta, to say there are things that we all experience, and what does it look like to process those things aloud and together? So viewers on YouTube, hello, thank you for watching. Listeners, or wherever you get your podcasts, thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you've maybe chuckled here or there. Maybe your head hurts a little bit right now. Maybe there's things you want to go Google or look up. And maybe there's something in the episode you want to share or write back, and we'll forward all your questions to Dr. Turnbull, and she'll respond in time. But really the biggest win, for at least speaking for myself here, for our show, is for you to continue the conversation, good listener. So talk about something you heard about today. It's one thing to passively take it in, but your brain, your body, your heart will engage very differently, I think, if you have a conversation about some of these things. So thanks for listening. Pastor David, thanks for being here.
Oh,
I don't know how many times you have to be a guest before you're an official friend of the show. We don't have too many friends of the show.
More than two.
You'll have to get on his podcast schedule. It's very full.
Yes. All right, you're a provisional friend of the show.
He's in high demand. Yeah.
Good. Greta, we'll be inviting you back sooner.
I would love to come back.
So,
this is so much fun.
She'll be back in December.
Yep.
Fantastic. Shane, as always, thanks for co-hosting. Thanks for pushing the buttons.
I just pushed the button.
You do it so well.
I forgot to push any of them this
I was
episode.
going to say, I was looking forward to some of those. Yeah.
I mashed several of them for you.
I don't mean to brag or boast, but I'm a little in the conversation. I'm just listening, and I forget about, that we're on a podcast and everything else.
You're a better listener.
Such a natural.
Well, what?
You're telling me you're a better listener than me?
Yeah.
It's recognizing our strengths and weaknesses. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
You looked at him for strengths and me for weaknesses.
It was subconscious. Read into it what you need to read into it.
On that note,
we'll settle this later.
All right. Really, though, thanks the three of you for being here. People listening, thank you. This is we're having fun doing it. But have a conversation, and unlike my poor example today, follow Shane and try to listen.
I was just kidding, by the way. That's an arbitrary metric.
No, it really is something I'm working on poorly and slowly. So anyway, with that being said, we'll see you next time.
That's the end of the episode, but we want to continue the conversation. Continue the conversation by sharing this episode, subscribing, or leaving a review. Connect with us on Instagram at 2414 Podcast. Connect with us through email at 2414@stlukes-church.com. Or best of all, keep the conversation going by inviting someone to process with you, so that you can each walk away with more understanding that leads to more conversation as the journey continues. If you happen to be in the Seattle-Tacoma area of Washington, stop by on a Sunday morning and say hi. 2414 is a podcast produced by St. Luke's Lutheran Church in Federal Way, Washington. To find more content, discover upcoming opportunities to connect in person, or to support the show, head on over to stlukes-church.com. Thanks for walking with us.